The courtroom was dead silent when Vanessa Elaine Okafor Whitfield walked in wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Raymond used to make in 2 weeks. She didn't look at him. Not once. She sat at the plaintiff's table, crossed her legs, whispered something to her attorney, and smiled the kind of smile you smile when you already know how a story ends. Raymond sat on the other side of the room in a pressed blue shirt he had ironed himself that morning. No lawyer beside him, no briefcase, no legal pad. Just his hands folded on the table and his eyes fixed straight ahead. The people in that gallery, court clerks, a few journalists, 2 of Vanessa's colleagues from the firm, they all looked at Raymond the same way. Like he was already finished. Like this was just the formal paperwork on a life that had already been decided. What none of them knew, what Vanessa herself had not bothered to find out, was that Raymond Elias Whitfield had been preparing for this exact morning for 14 months. And he had not come to lose. Dear friends, welcome to this channel. If you are new here, you found the right place. We tell real, raw, human stories that stay with you long after you stop watching. Before we go any further, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, drop a like if you believe loyalty should never be wasted, and tell us in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from right now? We love seeing your locations. Now, let's go back to the story. Raymond was born in Youngstown, Ohio, the second of 3 children raised by a woman named Clemmy Whitfield who worked the breakfast shift at a diner 6 days a week and still had dinner on the table by 6. His father, Orvis, drove freight until his knees gave out, and then he drove freight anyway because there was no other choice. Raymond grew up understanding one thing above everything else. That love is not a feeling you declare, it is a thing you do, every day, without applause. He was not a dramatic man. He was not loud. He was the kind of man who showed up. Always. He met Vanessa Elaine Okafor at a community college orientation in the fall of 1998. She was 22, brilliant, sharp as broken glass, and full of a hunger that Raymond found magnetic. She wanted to be a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A courtroom lawyer. The kind that walked into rooms and changed the air. Raymond believed her. From the very first conversation, he believed every word she said about who she was going to become, and something in him, something deep and quietly stubborn, decided right then that he would help her get there. They married in June of 2001 in a small ceremony at a Baptist church in Akron. 43 people attended. Clemmy cried. Vanessa's mother, a sharp-tongued woman named Euroline, gave a toast that somehow managed to be both warm and condescending at the same time. Raymond didn't care. He was looking at his wife. And Vanessa, in that moment, was looking back at him with something that felt like gratitude so deep it had no bottom. She had gotten into law school. A real one. Thurgood Marshall School of Law in Houston, Texas. Full application, 3 years of classes, books, fees, housing. The number was terrifying. Raymond did the math on a legal pad at the kitchen table that night while Vanessa slept, and then he did it again. And then he sat there for a long time in the quiet of their small apartment and made a decision that would define the next decade of his life. He would work, however many jobs it took, whatever hours were required. He would get her there. By 2002, Raymond was working 3 jobs. He drove a regional freight truck Monday through Friday, 6 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, hauling goods between Houston and San Antonio for a company called Brevard Logistics. 3 nights a week he stocked shelves at a grocery distribution warehouse from 10 at night to 3 in the morning. And on weekends, Saturday and Sunday both, he delivered food for a catering company that serviced corporate events across the Houston metro area. He slept in 4-hour increments. He ate whatever was fast and cheap. He drove Vanessa to campus when her car wouldn't start, which was often because they couldn't afford repairs. He packed her lunch so she wouldn't spend money on campus food. He wore the same 4 shirts on rotation because he refused to buy new clothes until she had her books for the semester. His hands were rough. His eyes were perpetually tired. And he never, not once, not in 3 years of law school, complained to Vanessa about it. Because she was studying. Because this was the plan. Because Raymond Whitfield did not make promises he was not prepared to keep. There were signs, even then. Small ones. The kind you don't see clearly until you're standing on the other side of them. In Vanessa's second year of law school, she started coming home later than her classes required. She made new friends, other law students, sharper dressed, more connected, and Raymond noticed that she never invited them to the apartment. When he asked once, casual and genuinely curious, she told him the apartment was too small. He nodded and accepted it. In her third year, she stopped mentioning him when she talked about her future. It used to be, when we get to a good place, and once I'm working and we can breathe. Slowly, quietly, it became, when I make partner, and once I'm established. The pronoun shifted. Raymond heard it, but he told himself it was stress. Law school was brutal. She was exhausted and under pressure, and he needed to give her room. That was what love required. Room. Vanessa graduated in May of 2005. Raymond stood in that crowd in a suit he had borrowed from his brother-in-law. Pressed, fitted, beaming. And when she walked across that stage and held up her diploma, he felt something crack open in his chest that wasn't pain. It was pride, pure and enormous. She looked out into the crowd and found his face, and she smiled. And in that smile, Raymond saw the woman he had married and believed everything was going to be fine. She passed the Texas bar on her first attempt. She was hired 6 months later by a mid-sized litigation firm in Houston called Hartwell, Price and Associates. The salary was modest at first, but it was real. It was hers. And Raymond, who by this point had been promoted to regional fleet supervisor at Brevard Logistics, a steady raise, a title, real hours, quietly pulled back from 2 of his 3 jobs. Not because Vanessa asked him to, because he was tired in his bones, and he genuinely believed, that the hard part was over. It wasn't. The hard part was just changing shape. By 2007, Vanessa had a reputation at the firm. She was ruthless in the best way, meticulous, composed, devastating in cross-examination. She billed more hours than anyone at her level, and she made it look effortless. The money improved. They moved from the small apartment in southwest Houston to a townhouse in the Montrose neighborhood. It was nice. It had a backyard. Raymond planted tomatoes back there because his mother always had a garden, and he missed the feeling of something growing. But Vanessa's world was expanding in ways that Raymond's wasn't, and rather than pulling him into that expansion, she began to treat the distance between their worlds like a wall she had the right to build. She started having work dinners he wasn't invited to. She bought a wardrobe on a credit card she opened without telling him. When senior partners and colleagues came up in conversation, she described Raymond as my husband, with a flatness in her voice that made it sound like a legal category rather than a relationship. He noticed. He kept noticing. In 2009, Vanessa was offered a position at a prestigious firm in Dallas, Caldwell, Raines and Sutter, a firm with a national reputation, the kind of firm where partnership meant real power and real wealth. She told Raymond over dinner. She didn't ask. She told him. She was taking it. They were moving to Dallas. Raymond had been with Brevard Logistics for 7 years at that point. He had worked his way up, knew the routes, knew the people, knew the business from the bottom of the container to the top of the ledger. Leaving meant starting over. But he packed everything they owned, drove the moving truck himself to save money, and followed his wife to a city where he knew nobody, because that was who he was. That was Raymond Elias Whitfield. In Dallas, he found work at a freight brokerage company called Sutter Plains Transport and Freight within 3 months. Good company, solid management. And Raymond, being Raymond, did not just show up. He learned everything there was to learn about freight brokerage, about contracts, about carrier negotiation, about logistics infrastructure. He took evening courses online through a program at UT Arlington. He sat at the kitchen table with textbooks after Vanessa had gone to bed, studying industry regulations and contract law with the same quiet intensity he had once used to budget their grocery trips down to the dollar. Vanessa made partner at Caldwell, Rains and Sutter in March of 2013. It took 4 years. It was a monumental achievement. Raymond bought champagne. He cooked dinner, a full meal, from scratch, and he set the table with candles and the good dishes they had gotten as wedding gifts and barely used. When she came home that evening, glowing and exhausted and electric with the news, he poured 2 glasses and said, quietly, "You did it, Van. Everything you said you were going to do." She kissed him. She said thank you. And then she took her glass to the bedroom and got on a call with a colleague. And Raymond sat at the table alone and ate the dinner he had made and told himself this was just how it was when someone reached the top. They got busy. They got pulled in new directions. He gave it time. He should not have given it time. Because time, in this case, was not a healer. It was a magnifier. By the fall of 2013, Vanessa had stopped wearing her wedding ring to work. When Raymond mentioned it, gently, without accusation, she said the ring caught on her briefcase clasp. He accepted it. By early 2014, she had begun to correct him in front of people. Once at a dinner with 2 of her colleagues, he made a comment about a delivery routing decision at his company, and Vanessa cut in and redirected the conversation with a dismissiveness that made the other people at the table go quiet and then talk louder to cover the discomfort. Raymond said nothing. He was good at saying nothing. He was practiced at it. But something in him noted the moment and filed it away in a place he didn't visit often. In June of 2014, he came home from work to find a man's jacket draped over the back of the living room couch. A very expensive jacket, not his size. When he asked Vanessa whose jacket it was, she said a colleague had left it after stopping by to drop off documents. Raymond looked at her for a long time. She looked back, and the silence between them was so complete and so heavy that they both understood something had been crossed, even if neither of them named it that night. He hired a private investigator named Deshaun Pruitt in August of 2014. He did it without drama. He sat in Deshaun's office on a Tuesday afternoon during his lunch break and spoke in a low, measured voice and said he needed to know the truth about his wife. Deshaun was a former Dallas PD detective, quiet man, precise, zero tolerance for theatrics. He nodded, took the retainer, and went to work. For weeks later, Raymond sat in the same office and looked at a thin folder of photographs and call logs and credit card statements that Deshaun had compiled. The man in the jacket was a senior partner at the firm, Hartley Sutter, 49 years old, married, powerful. The affair had been going on for at least 8 months. Raymond closed the folder. He sat there without speaking for close to 2 minutes. Deshaun waited, because he had been doing this long enough to know when a man needed silence. Then Raymond said, very quietly, "Is this everything?" Deshaun said, "That's everything." Raymond said, "Thank you," stood up, straightened his jacket, and left. He did not go home that night and confront her. That is important to understand. A different man would have. A man operating on pain alone would have walked through that door with the folder in his hand and let everything collapse at once. But Raymond Whitfield sat in his truck in a parking garage for an hour and thought, and what he thought was not about revenge. Not yet. What he thought about was everything he had poured into this woman. Every hour of sleep he had sacrificed, every meal he had skipped, every dream of his own he had quietly set aside. And how, without realizing it, he had built an entire life around protecting her future while doing almost nothing to protect his own. That was going to change. He went home that night. He was civil. He was even kind. And Vanessa, who had learned over 12 years of marriage that Raymond was not a suspicious or dramatic man, noticed nothing different. Hey, if you are still watching right now, do something for me. Pause for just 1 second and drop the word Raymond in the comments below. Let's see who is truly locked into this story, because what is coming in the next few minutes is going to completely flip everything you think you know about this man. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching. Over the next 14 months, Raymond did 4 things that Vanessa never knew about. The first was that he hired an attorney of his own, a family law specialist in Dallas named Bertrand Hale, known in legal circles as one of the most meticulous divorce litigators in North Texas. The second was that he accelerated a business he had been building quietly on the side since 2011. During his years at Sutter Plains Transport, Raymond had developed deep relationships with independent freight carriers across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. He understood their pain points, the feast or famine nature of independent hauling, the nightmare of contract paperwork, the impossibility of competing with larger brokerages. In 2011, he had quietly registered a freight brokerage company of his own through a business formation service, a limited liability company called RW Carrier Solutions, LLC. He had done this with modest savings he had redirected from a personal account Vanessa didn't monitor. He had grown it slowly and carefully, building carrier relationships and securing contracts through the evening hours after Vanessa was asleep, through lunch breaks, through weekends when she was at the firm or with Hartley Sutter. By the time Vanessa filed for divorce in November of 2015, RW Carrier Solutions had 11 active carrier contracts, 3 corporate shipping clients, and a verified annual revenue of $460,000. The third thing Raymond did was document everything, every sacrifice, every financial record, every bank statement from their marriage. His attorney had advised him early on that Texas was a community property state, which meant the assets accumulated during the marriage belonged to both of them equally. But Raymond went further. He had kept, in a fireproof lockbox in his truck, not their home, 12 years of receipts, pay stubs, bank statements, tuition payment confirmations, and a personal journal he had kept inconsistently, but honestly since 2003. That journal had dates. It had amounts. It had names. The fourth thing Raymond did was wait. Patient, clear-eyed, and completely still. Vanessa filed for divorce on November 18, 2015. She did it through Caldwell, Rains and Sutter's network, hiring an outside firm, Bosworth and Crane, to represent her, which was smart enough. Her petition argued that the marriage had broken down irreparably, that the parties had grown incompatible, and that given Raymond's modest income as a logistics employee, there were no significant marital assets to dispute. She listed Raymond's estimated annual income at $72,000. She listed her own at $340,000. She proposed a clean break, no alimony in either direction, no shared property beyond the townhouse, which she intended to keep. She believed Raymond had nothing. She had lived beside this man for 14 years, and she genuinely believed he had built nothing without her. That belief was the most expensive mistake of her life. Raymond was served the papers at his office on a Thursday morning. He read them, set them on his desk, and called Bertrand Hale. His attorney had been ready for 8 months. The first hearing was procedural and quiet. Vanessa's attorneys were polished and dismissive, the way expensive legal teams are dismissive when they believe the other side cannot fight back. Raymond sat with Bertrand Hale and said very little. When Vanessa's lead attorney, a man named Preston Bosworth, made an opening statement about the simplicity of the case and the modest nature of the marital estate, Bertrand Hale simply nodded and requested a 30-day discovery period. Bosworth agreed without concern. That was fine. Discovery was where this case was going to live or die. In discovery, Raymond's legal team submitted the full financial history of RW Carrier Solutions, LLC, formation date, revenue history, tax filings, carrier contracts, and evaluation conducted by an independent CPA that placed the current market value of the company at approximately $2.3 million. The company had been formed in 2011. Raymond and Vanessa had been married since 2001. Under Texas community property law, any business formed during a marriage and grown using marital resources, including time, shared income, and shared household stability, was presumed to be a marital asset. Vanessa's team had not seen this coming, not remotely. The email Preston Bosworth sent to his client that evening reportedly took 4 attempts to write. There was also the matter of the journal. Bertrand Hale entered 12 years of documented financial sacrifice into the record. Every month Raymond had contributed 90% or more of their household income during Vanessa's law school years. Every tuition payment, every grocery receipt, every car repair, every utility bill paid entirely from Raymond's wages while Vanessa built her career. The total financial contribution Raymond had made toward Vanessa's legal education and early career costs, adjusted conservatively, came to over $187,000 in real dollars, not including the opportunity cost of the career trajectory Raymond had delayed for himself. And then there was the matter of Hartley Sutter. Raymond's legal team did not introduce the affair photographs immediately. They waited. They let Vanessa's attorneys make their arguments about incompatibility and irreconcilable differences. They let the narrative of a quiet, unambitious husband who had simply grown apart from a successful wife develop in the room. And then, calmly and without theatrical flourish, Bertrand Hale introduced Deshawn Pruitt's investigative report into evidence. The call logs, the credit card records showing hotel charges during periods Vanessa had told Raymond she was at legal conferences, and 14 photographs. Texas is a Judge Pemberton issued her ruling 6 weeks later. Given the documentation of marital contribution to the formation and growth of RW Carrier Solutions, she classified the business as a marital asset. Given the established adultery and the disproportionate financial sacrifice of one spouse to support the professional development of the other, she awarded Raymond 60% of the total marital estate, including a 60% ownership stake in RW Carrier Solutions, which his legal team then structured to allow him to buy out Vanessa's share at appraised value over 24 months. The townhouse was ordered sold. Proceeds split 60-40 in Raymond's favor. Vanessa received no alimony. Raymond received 14 months of rehabilitative support payments, not because he needed them financially, but because the evidence supported it and Bertrand Hale had asked for it on principle. Vanessa Okafor Whitfield sat at that plaintiff's table and heard the ruling with the same controlled expression she used in courtrooms. But the people who knew her face, and by this point Raymond knew every register of it, could see that she was doing the hard work of keeping something from showing. It showed anyway. Raymond stood, buttoned his jacket, shook Bertrand Hale's hand, and walked to the back of the courtroom where his mother was standing. Clemmy put her hand on his face and looked at him for a long moment. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. In the 2 years that followed, Raymond Whitfield rebuilt with the kind of quiet intensity that had always defined him. Except now, it was fully for himself. He relocated RW Carrier Solutions to a commercial office in Fort Worth, hired 3 full-time employees, and expanded his carrier network into New Mexico and Arkansas. By the end of 2018, annual revenue had crossed $1.2 million. He bought a house in a calm neighborhood in Fort Worth. Nothing extravagant, a 4-bedroom craftsman with a large backyard where he immediately planted a garden. Tomatoes, peppers, squash. His mother came to visit that first summer and sat in a lawn chair watching him dig in the dirt, and she said, "Your father would have liked this house." Raymond said, "I know." In the spring of 2019, He was introduced through a mutual friend to a woman named Leona Frederica Gaines, a middle school science teacher from Fort Worth, divorced herself, with a 10-year-old son named Tobias. Leona was not loud or dramatic. She was careful with people the way someone is careful when they have been hurt before and decided the hurt was worth learning from. On their second date, Raymond told her honestly about his marriage, his sacrifices, and the divorce. He didn't perform the story. He just told it. Leona listened without interrupting, and at the end she said, "Do you regret any of it?" Raymond thought about it for a real moment. Then he said, "I don't regret who I was. I just needed to stop giving that version of myself to the wrong person." Leona nodded like that made sense to her in a way that was personal. It did. They were married in September of 2021 at a small outdoor ceremony in Fort Worth. 41 people attended. Clemmy was there, in a yellow dress this time, and she cried again. And this time Raymond cried too because he was old enough and tired enough and honest enough to know what it meant to be in the right room with the right people after a very long time in the wrong ones. Vanessa Elaine Okafor continued to practice law in Dallas. She was good at it. She remained good at it. The affair with Hartley Sutter ended within months of the divorce proceedings becoming public. His wife's family had significant equity in the firm, and the fallout was professionally damaging in ways that no legal skill could fully repair. Vanessa rebuilt her client base at a different firm. She was resilient. She had always been resilient. That was never the question. The question that had followed her since that courtroom ruling. Through long evenings in a too-quiet apartment, and through the careful conversations she had begun having with a therapist she finally agreed to see in 2017, was a harder one. It was not about Raymond's company or the money or the judge's ruling. It was about that moment in the courtroom when Clemmy Whitfield looked at the judge and told the truth about her son. Vanessa had heard those words from across the room, and she had held her expression in place because that was what you did. That was her training. That was her discipline. But the words had landed. Every dollar he made, every hour he had, he believed in her more than she ever believed in herself. Vanessa knew they were true. She had always known they were true. And knowing something true and living honestly inside of it are two entirely different things, and that difference had cost her more than any court ruling ever could. Raymond never made a public statement about the divorce. He never spoke to any journalists. He did not post about it or discuss it at industry events or use it as a cautionary story in conversation. When people who knew the story asked him how he felt about everything, he gave the same answer every time. He said, "I worked hard. I built something. I'm still here." That was it. That was all he felt needed saying. Because Raymond Whitfield had never been a man who needed an audience to validate what he knew was true. He had learned that in Youngstown, watching his father drive freight on bad knees and his mother work the breakfast shift in worn-out shoes. He had carried it through 3 jobs and 4-hour sleep cycles and 12 years of a marriage that consumed him. And he had carried it into a courtroom in Dallas on a Wednesday morning in March, in a pressed blue shirt, with no briefcase and no legal pad, and sat quietly while the truth made its way to the surface the way truth always does when someone has the patience to wait for it. There's a story about a man who plants a seed and then walks away and lets the seasons do their work. And when he comes back, years later, there is something standing there that nobody expected because nobody watched it grow. That was Raymond. The woman who dismissed him as a burden became the evidence for why he deserved everything she had tried to leave him without. The sacrifice she thought made him small was the exact foundation upon which the law said he had the right to stand. And the man she walked away from, that quiet, tired, deeply faithful man, was sitting in a Fort Worth garden with tomatoes coming in and a woman who loved him clearly and a stepson named Tobias who had started asking him questions about trucks and logistics and whether it was hard to start your own company. Raymond always answered honestly. He said, "It's hard. But hard doesn't mean impossible. It just means you have to decide what you're willing to do and then do it without making a lot of noise about it. Tobias always nodded at that with the focused expression of a 10-year-old who is filing information away for future use. Raymond recognized that expression. He had worn it himself for most of his life. If this story moved you, if something in Raymond's patience, his silence, his refusal to collapse spoke to something you have lived or are living right now, please leave a comment below and tell us what part hit you the hardest. Was it the sacrifice? The betrayal? The courtroom? The garden at the end? This channel exists because of you. The people who watch, who feel, who share these stories with someone who needs them. Please hit the subscribe button right now if you have not already. Leave a like because Raymond's story deserves one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and drop your location in the comments. We read every single one. Thank you for watching. And remember, the people who build quietly are rarely the ones who lose.